On one hand, it seems like all this is top-heavy with Venetian and Italian, but this is part of the culture they had, the Jewish culture. So when they spoke Judeo-Italian, it was in a Venetian dialect. So for hundreds of years, they lived under Venetian rule. So the Venetian period in Corfu was from 1386 to 1799. When Corfu surrendered to Venice in 1386, the deputation of 6 persons sent to arrange the terms included the Jew David Semo. A decree of 1387 reaffirmed the previous rights of Jews under Byzantine rule, but in 1406 they were forbidden to acquire land and were ordered to wear a distinguished badge. In 1408 they were forbidden to own land worth 2,000 ducats, later increased to over 4,000 ducats. The Venetian authorities frequently imposed heavy taxes on the Jewish community in order to finance the wars against the Turks. On the other hand, the Jews sometimes gave voluntary contributions and assisted in the fortification of the walls. The Jews lived at first in 2 streets between the Old Town and the fortress. When this area was included in the new fortifications, they were scattered for a while throughout the city, but in 1622 they were confined to a ghetto. Despite these restrictions, the Venetian authorities were more liberal toward the Jews of Corfu than they were toward the Jews of Venice itself. During the 16th century, there were 2 congregations in Corfu, that of the Romaniotes, who preserved the ancient Byzantine rite, known as Minhag Corfu, and that of the Italians. In the course of time, the Italian community was enlarged by Jews from Apulia, Spanish exiles, Portuguese Marranos, and Ashkenazim, who ultimately adopted the Sephardic rite. The 2 communities did not always run smoothly. The Romaniote community enjoyed special privileges and objected to the right of permanent residence being granted to the Italian Jews. Between 1662 and 1664, all Jews of Corfu received equal status. Each of the communities had their 2 overseers, called the syndiki, 2 kashrut supervisors, and 2 parnasim. In 1563, the traveler Elijah of Pizarro reported that the Italians constituted the majority of the Jewish colony in Corfu. They imposed their language on all the Jews of the island, most of whom spoke the Apulian dialect interlaced with Greek words. In 1522, there were about 200 Jewish households, in 1558 about 400, and in 1663 500. The Jews of Corfu engaged in dyeing, leather tanning, money lending, trading, and the brokerage of goods between Venice and the Levant. The Jewish merchants of Corfu were granted privileges not granted to those of Venice itself. A New Testament in Judeo-Spanish was printed in Corfu in 1829, no doubt for missionary purposes. Hebrew printing by Jews began in 1853 and continued until 1896. Of 14 items published, 13 were by Joseph Nachamuli, who also supplied a Greek translation of some of the liturgical items. The British period was from 1815 to 1864. The Jews deteriorated under this period. They were excluded from public office and disenfranchised, and Jewish lawyers were forbidden to plea in court. Judah Beavis, known for his support of the ideal of the return to Zion and of the Haskalah, the Enlightenment movement, was Rabbi of Corfu from 1831. In 1855, the Jewish community comprised 4,000 people. Corfu was annexed to Greece in 1864. The local population, meaning the Greek Orthodox and some Catholics, maintained their old prejudice, and when equal rights were restored to the Jews upon the island's annexation to the Kingdom of Greece in 1864, riots broke out, causing a large exodus of Jews to Greece and Italy. Despite local Greek Orthodox hostility toward the local Jews, the latter had significant political weight in the city of Corfu. Numerous Jews who worked as lawyers and notaries enjoyed a high public profile. Councilman and international olive oil merchant Elias de Mordo was appointed as deputy mayor, and in 1870 was elected mayor of the city of Corfu. There was a famous large-scale blood libel in 1891. In 1891, when the Jewish population of 5,000 still lived in their own quarter, a blood libel caused a storm on the island and throughout Greece, brought on a large-scale migration to Trieste and Alexandria, Egypt. A 9-year-old Jewish girl, Rubena Sardis, was murdered by a local Greek Orthodox, but the Greeks orchestrated a murder of a Greek boy and blamed it on the local Jews. The ensuing riots lasted 3 weeks and some 22 Jews died. The Jews were also surrounded and locked in the ghetto. Foreign ships were sent to the island to quell the disturbances in light of the apathetic attitude of the Greek authorities. From then on, the Jewish community waned. Many Jews migrated to Trieste in Egypt. The local Alliance Israélite Universelle representative, the philologist Lazarus Bolelli, represented the Jewish community at the subsequent trial, which ended in a mockery in light of the acquittal of the perpetrators. Bolelli did not find his place in academia in Greece and eventually migrated to London, where he became a professor of linguistics. He also wanted to establish a chair in Jewish studies in Greece, which was not considered legal. Only recently in Salonika, maybe 4 years ago, did the government recognize the legal right to have a chair in Jewish studies. The French novelist Albert Cohen grew up in Corfu in the early 1890s and depicted the picturesque Jews of the island in many of his works. In 1897, the journalist and community leader Moïse Kaimis started the Zionist organization Mevaser Tzion, and from 1899 to 1901 edited the Zionist organ Israelite Chronographos. Under the influence of the Russian Hebrew teacher Bezalel Davidson, who passed through the island in 1906, the Zionist Society Meketz Nir Damim was formed. In 1913, Chaim Mizrahi formed the Zionist organization Tikvat Tzion, and in 1924, a new group called Theodor Herzl was formed, and it eventually affiliated with the Zionist revisionist movement. In World War I, the community suffered another blood libel with rioting mobs, but there were no casualties, and the authorities assisted in the quelling of the disturbances. In 1923, about 3,000 Jews lived on the island, most of them small tradesmen who struggled to earn a living. There were 4 synagogues in the town of Corfu, all following the Sephardi rite: the Greek synagogue, the Apulian Spanish, and Apulian Minyan. Now, why Sephardic rite? Because when the Jews came to Salonika from Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, they essentially became the hegemonic rabbinical authorities, and the prayer books changed to Sephardic prayer books, even amongst the Romaniot and Italian Jewish communities. In 1932, the Rabbi Judah Nechama, who came from Hebron, became the rabbi in Corfu, failed to persuade members of the Italian Chevra to accept leadership positions in the Jewish communal administration. Since they refused to accept the authority of the Greek Chevra, the Supreme Court in Athens ruled that each Chevra would remain separate from the communal organization. On the eve of World War II, the community numbered 2,000. Now, before Nechama, the chief rabbi of Corfu was an Ashkenazi, Rabbi Abraham Schreiber, who was the grandson of the famous rabbi of Presburg, the Chatam Sofer. He was much more liberal, though. In 1915, Chief Rabbi Schreiber, assisted by teacher Moises Kaimis, founded an evening school for the needy Jewish pupils to whom the community offered free meals. His efforts succeeded, and the number of pupils who attended rose from 30 to 230. In 1925, Rabbi Schreiber founded a rabbinical school. Today, the only synagogue left is the Scola Greca. There were 2 Romaniot synagogues. During the occupation by the Italians, 1941 to 43, there was relative quiet. The Germans occupied the island on the 27th of September 1943. On June 14th, 1944, 1,800 Jews were deported to Auschwitz. Before that, they had been arrested on June 6th. They were imprisoned in the fortress, and then they were sent to the Haidari camp in Athens and then deported. On June 10, 1944, 4 days after the bombing of Normandy, with the end of the war in sight, the Jews of Corfu were rounded up to be deported off the island. First, they were imprisoned in the old Venetian fort in dank or dark, cramped quarters. When they were sent off the island in small boats, the final destination being Auschwitz-Birkenau. Of the 1,795 Jews of Corfu who were deported, only 121 would survive. The mayor of the island issued a proclamation thanking the Germans for ridding the island of the Jews so that the economy of the island would revert to its rightful owners. All that remains of the vital Jewish presence in Corfu is a small and highly assimilated community, numbering about 80 Jews. Now it's less even. Most survivors of the Holocaust and the La Scuola Greca synagogue, built in the 18th century and is still standing in what was once the Jewish ghetto.